Well, Ross Burns has written extensively on the history of Syria. He's also served as the Australian ambassador to Damascus, as well as Lebanon, and more recently to Israel. And he joins me now in the studio. Ross, thanks very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Jay.
Now, the news out of Syria this morning is very disturbing. At least 30 people killed in the latest clashes. Is President Assad's regime simply trying to eliminate all opposition? What is his strategy?
Well, I doubt whether he can eliminate all opposition. I mean, for one thing, he was himself professing to be encouraging the process of reform until recent events.
So what's happened?
So I think he has been trying to control the process of reform, but I think it's now got out of control. But I think there are a whole lot of issues bubbling away beneath all these events. I haven't got many details of what actually happened yesterday with 30 deaths. It's very disturbing, but it seems that these events are still bubbling up all over the place. And I think there are several different civil wars going on within the country. You know, none of them big enough to be really called a civil war in capital letters, but I think you've got a lot of pressures on the regime, both from the Sunni majority, from people who are much more Islamist in their orientation. I think you've got local issues in some of these places, particularly that incident which seems to be bubbling away on the Lebanese border. You've also got other ethnic minorities which are trying to take advantage of this situation to press for greater freedom and privileges for themselves. But what is sort of sustaining it all, I think, is popular feeling that the regime has been far too harsh, far too repressive, and it's time they had some greater freedom to express themselves.
Now, Bashar al-Assad is Western educated, speaks English. I think he met his wife in the UK. Very different, of course, to his father. But does he have credentials as a conciliator, if you like? I mean, can he push enough reform to give a bit more to the people to make them continue to support him?
Well, I think this is the big issue now. I think they've probably got on top of the security situation if they can keep on sort of blasting the opposition every Friday in the most crude and appalling manner. But I think they haven't really set the right parameters for how much reform they should allow versus, continued repression. I think that's been the issue all along for the president, and I think he's very badly mishandled that balance.
So what do you make of President Barack Obama's recent statement on Syria? I mean, is this helping the situation to call for Assad basically to back off from the protesters?
I think he's been very careful in the way he's calibrated his comments. I think we're not obviously facing another Egypt or Libya type situation. It's a very different situation, and particularly because it's very hard to tell what the fallout would be in Syria if you did dismantle the regime just overnight like that. I mean, I don't think you've got the safety net that Egypt had with the army, which has a much more credible role in society than it does in Syria. So I think Western responses, although they've gone for some measures of sanctions, these have been fairly marginal measures, but I think they want Syria to more or less come out of this as a reform society, but much along the same secular lines as you've had in the last few decades. So it's a difficult situation for the West.
What likelihood is there, though, that it can emerge as a reform society? I mean, we barely know about opposition groups, other potential leaders there.
Well, this is the problem. The opposition is fragmented and the government's fragmented in its response. I mean, you clearly have tensions within the regime between those who are more reform-minded, in which maybe once you would have included the president, and those who are very much part of the old power structure, who want to keep the repressive apparatus very, very strong, very much in place, and to use it ruthlessly.
There have, of course, been economic sanctions in Syria with the international community for many years. So are these new measures likely to have an impact?
Well, I think the measures that were taken before were largely American ones, and they were really more nuisance sanctions than anything else. But I don't think that anyone sees the latest package of the two packages, the EU ones and the American ones, as really going to be showstoppers. I think they're still symbolic ones.
If I can move on to the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, because of course you were the ambassador in Israel. Moving back to the 1967 borders, what's the significance of Barack Obama actually mentioning this border? Because it hasn't been done for a while, I think, by an American president.
Well, it's really one of those don't mention the war situations. Everyone knows that we're talking about the 67 borders. This is, I mean, having been in on these issues over 30 years or so, I mean, you're really talking about the 67 borders when you talk about peacemaking. Because the whole international community, including the Americans and Australia, and of course the EU, regard the occupation of the pre-67 Palestine as illegal in international law. So of course you're talking about the 67 borders. For example, Kevin Rudd said it in February in a speech in Athens. Perhaps a little bit more nuanced than what Obama was saying, but I think Obama, by saying it openly, is sending a signal. But I think there were some other very interesting elements in that speech which haven't been singled out. I think it suits Netanyahu to try to say, I'm outraged that you were referring to the 67 borders, but there were a lot of other points in there which I think are even more outraging for the Israelis.
Well, if I can just ask you about the point Netanyahu made about that being indefensible. Of course, if you removed the Jewish settlements, it wouldn't be indefensible, would it?
Exactly, yes. I mean, it's indefensible because you've planted all those Israeli population clusters inside that border. And of course, you're always talking about indefensible borders. Borders in that part of the world are, in themselves, indispensable. We don't have any large mountain ranges or big rivers which are going to divide armies. You know, you're always going to talk about indefensible borders. So I think that's really just a propaganda point, really.
Where does it go from here?
I think under this present Israeli government, it doesn't go anywhere. I don't think they're capable of taking any decisions about peacemaking.